You're recording?
Hi, Tzeporah. Very nice to meet you. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, I understand you were something of a central figure in Clayoquot Sound 27 years ago. What brings you back to Vancouver Island and this blockade in particular?
It's actually really hard to believe that after almost 30 years, we have to be doing this again. And there's a lot of strange similarities. Back then, 1993, it was an NDP government that had promised to protect Clayoquot Sound and failed to. Today, it's an NDP government that has told us they're going to protect old-growth forests. Yet the trees are falling all around us. These are ancient giants. These are some of the last big trees in British Columbia. There's so little left. And still, the government seems to be dragging its feet, and the industry seems to be logging the last of it as fast as they can. So, I think civil disobedience is important when our governments fail us, when they refuse to stand up for the public good. And over again, this government has allowed logging, and not just allowed it, but in the last year we've seen a 50% increase in permits to log old growth. A year after their expert science panel, when that said you need to protect this last old growth, and they promised to do it. So those are the moments when we all need to take a stand. So I hope that by being here, I can not only help raise awareness, but encourage others to come here too, because this is the last stand for BC's old growth.
Other than civil disobedience, are there any next steps legally being taken by you or any of the organizations you're working with that you can share?
There are so many lawsuits across this province, many of them by Indigenous nations who oppose the logging of old growth. And it's a crime that's what we call reconciliation in this country, that we take Indigenous nations to court when they want to stop the logging of old growth or protect their traditional territories. There are lawsuits on endangered species because that's another broken promise from this government. They promised to put in place an Endangered Species Act. They haven't done anything for species at risk. So, there's a number of legal challenges that are relevant to this story. And now, unfortunately, there's a number of citizens that are going to be embroiled in the law because arrests started in earnest yesterday. And already close to a dozen of British Columbians citizens who have the courage to actually stand up and say, but you promised. You promised to protect this old growth, and now it's falling, and they're standing in front of it. They should be treated like heroes, and instead, they're going to jail.
And in your experience, what can the people who have been arrested expect?
If you've been arrested violating an injunction, usually you can expect to be taken to jail, to be offered a release conditions. If you sign those release conditions, usually you're released, but then you have to appear in court, and your sentence, well, based on history, can be everything from 10 days community service to 45 days or longer in jail. We don't know. To a certain extent, that's dependent on the judge.
This time, we've seen significant limitations on press freedom while covering these blockades with the RCMP implementing broad exclusion zones. I'm going to start that over again.
Could I get you to step over just half a foot? Perfect.
So this week, we've seen significant limitations on press freedom while covering these blockades, with the RCMP implementing broad exclusion zones. How is this different from 1993? Are these attempts to restrict press access a concern for activists like yourself who are trying to get their message out?
I think it's absolutely abhorrent that the RCMP and therefore the government that they're acting on behalf are restricting freedom of press. In Clayoquot Sound, the press were right there. Everyone was right there. We could see what was happening. People could bear witness to it. They could support it, or they could protest it. But that's what free speech is about. We have rights in this country to protect free speech and to make sure that people are safe. That's the role of the media, is as a watchdog. And excluding the media, I think, is dangerous, especially given that we just lived a year where we all learned about widespread police racism and brutality. There are a number of Indigenous people on these blockades and a number of Indigenous youth, and the press should be not only allowed but encouraged to be able to bear witness to what's happening here. Unless, of course, the RCMP and the government are embarrassed by what's happening here. That would be the only reason that I could see that they would be restricting press access.
Can you talk about how the tactics we've seen the RCMP use this week compared to what you saw in 1993? For example, they've deployed shrouds around protesters as they remove them. They've put generators to create noise disruptions so that we can't record.
We didn't see any of that in Clayoquot Sound. In Clayoquot Sound, there was a almost grudging respect between the parties. The RCMP were there to do their job, and they understood that we felt so called that this was our job to stand up for the old growth. And they didn't necessarily agree with it, but, there was a grudging respect, there was a freedom of movement. There weren't any strange tactics. Anything that the RCMP did, they warned us about ahead of time. So in that respect, it's very different from Clayoquot Sound. I think we're seeing some really dubious practices that put citizens' safety at risk, and that make you question, what the government's motives are here.
And how about their tactics with respect to removing protesters?
That's why I'm here, is to see it for myself and to do everything I can to support the folks who have been standing for so long. The idea that these blockades have been up for 9 months during a pandemic, during some of the worst weather that we get on the coast, is absolutely amazing. And, these people aren't criminals, they're heroes. And that's how they should be treated. And I want to visit all of the blockades. I want to see for myself what's actually happening here and do everything I can to encourage more people to join us.
Can you talk about the significance of these trees and why people are willing to go to such extreme lengths and risk arrest to protect them?
Because these are the last of them. These trees were standing before Columbus ever landed his boats and started colonization on this coast. These trees were standing, many of them, before we even called this nation Canada. Some of these trees are some of the oldest in the world. They can be 300 feet tall, 30 stories tall. They're the largest living biomass. A hectare of temperate rainforest stores more carbon than almost any other ecosystem on Earth. And with so few wild places left on this planet, these old growth remnants are what are going to maintain ecosystem services, the air we breathe and the water we drink, and a planet that is resilient to climate change. Without them, we're in trouble. So the idea that we're logging them now for short-term profit is absurd.
Can you talk a bit about how this situation compares to 1993? What's the same, what's different to what happened in Clayoquot Sound?
What's the same is that, again, we have an NDP government that is lying to the people and saying they're protecting old growth. I can't believe that after 30 years, we're standing here again. And they're continuing to allow the last of the old growth. And not only that, but telling people they're protecting it. That's abhorrent. Either this particular government, Minister Conroy and Premier Horgan, are completely incompetent or they're lying. But either way, it doesn't look good. So 30 years ago, we stood on the road in Clayoquot Sound, and that's why Clayoquot Sound stands today. And that's why I'm here at Fairy Creek, and why I hope more people will join us. Because these forests will stay standing if we stand up for them.
I have one last question for you. There are people here today who were not even born 27 years ago. What can you say about the tactics employed by these younger activists?
What's amazing is that back in Clayoquot Sound, good organizing was about how many people you could get around your kitchen table. Today, we're connected to tens or hundreds of thousands in minutes. And I hope the NDP realizes that. Because even back in Clayoquot Sound, when we had to fax people to get them to come onto the road, people came. Thousands of people came. The polls show that the majority of British Columbians want old-growth forests protected. And the reason this government wants to arrest people and take down these blockades is they don't want people to know that. But again, what's different is we can communicate now to hundreds of thousands of people in seconds, and we're going to.
In fact, it looks like some of the social media accounts have been taken down. perhaps forcibly, Instagram, Facebook, RSS feeds. Any comment on that?
It's absolutely disgusting that they are taking down feeds at a critical moment of people's safety. And I urge more of the larger environmental groups in the country to stand up and support Fairy Creek. I'm here from Stand.Earth. We have quite a web presence and a long list of Canadians who are members who we can be in direct communication with. So they can take down Twitter handles and Instagram accounts. We can put up more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.
I had
Let's get
one.
to